Tayyip Erdogan is the most mysterious politician to emerge in the 96 history of Turkey. He is polarizing and popular, autocratic and protective. Erdogan's ideology shifts every few years, and he appears to make up his roadmap as he goes along. He is short-tempered. He once walked off the stage after an angry exchange of words with the Israeli president at the World Economic Forum in Davos. He can also be extremely patient. It has taken him 16 years to build what he calls the new Turkey, an economically self-reliant country with a marginalized opposition and a suburban press. This mix of anger and calm has made Erdogan increasingly successful at the ballot box. He became prime minister in 2003, after his party won 34% of the vote, and by 2011, its share had risen to 50%. In 2014, when he ran for president in order to centralize his authority, more than half of Turks who cast a ballot voted for him. He did so again in 2018, by which time they had also voted to do away with the post of prime minister altogether. Erdogan has converted his popular mandate into power and has used that power to remake Turkey's relationships with the rest of the world. He has expanded Turkish influence in Syria and northern Iraq, entitled Turkey a NATO member toward China, Iran, and Russia. His use of power has also generated dissent among feminists, leftists, and the secular middle class. Under Erdogan's watch, Turkey has become the world's largest prison for journalists. Filmmakers, novelists, photographers, and scholars are also among the imprisoned. Turkey has banned gay and transgender pride marches since 2015. Wikipedia has also been blocked since 2017. In the wake of the financial crisis this year, candidates who were aligned with Erdogan lost support in the local elections. But even as his party allure diminishes, Erdogan may win a third presidential term in 2023. If that happens and Erdogan leaves office in 2028, he will go down in history as Turkey's second longest serving president, a year shy of Kemal Atatürk's rule. Atatürk, who was the father of the Turks, was an Ottoman general who abolished the caliphate in 1924 and modernized Turkey by force over the 1930s. Under his single-party regime, Atatürk forged a modern nation-state from the ashes of a collapsed empire, built a modern bureaucracy, supported the creation of a Turkish bourgeois, and convinced a Muslim nation to allow Western modernity into their lives. Erdogan initially criticized Atatürk's centralized remaking of Turkey, blaming him for his high-landed style of rule. Since 2008, when Erdogan started having to balance various factions of the bureaucracy, and even more so after 2013, when Turks took to the public squares to protest his policies, Erdogan has adopted strikingly similar methods. Ironically, the politician he first sought to distance himself from is the one he has to come to resemble the most. Erdogan was born in 1954, 16 years after Atatürk's death, in Kasimpasa, a rough Istanbul neighborhood of open sewers and muddy streets, famed for its firefighters, pickpockets, and Romani musicians. The son of a ferry captain, Erdogan made pocket money by selling Turkish bagels when he wasn't studying at a religion school. He also played soccer and dreamed of a soccer career. He rebelled against patriarchy, and his fellow Islamists didn't approve of his athletic chores. His father asked him to think of a proper job. Erdogan has distinguished himself from other Islamists through his calculated pragmatism, ushering in a tectonic shift in Turkish politics over the 90s. We don't need a bearded men who are good Quran recitants. We need people who do their job properly, Erdogan would rather say. As part of this drive, Erdogan established a network of volunteers who could put tens of thousands of party posters on walls in a few hours and distribute handouts to voters during modern commutes. These were his nerve ends, he said, capable of sending signals from the welfare party's administration to voters. Erdogan also used another analogy to describe this organization, a brick wall, carefully laid and difficult to break. This grassroots effort paid off in 1994, when Erdogan was elected Istanbul's mayor and moved from local to national politics. Years later, the AKP, his party, won Turkey's 2002 elections with 34% of the vote. The runner-up just received 19%. Earlier, conservative parties had also won landslides. The Democratic Party in 1950, Justice in 1965, and Motherland in 1983. But the leaders of those movements fared poorly once in power. Turkish generals hanged one on the gallows, ousted another in a coup, and attempted unsuccessfully to keep the third away from power. Erdogan was determined to avoid a similar fate. In 2004, he pledged to curtail the military's long-standing dominance of politics and demote the chief of the Turkish general staff, once a demigod, to a public servant. These promises won him support from the liberals, but Turkey's military guidance wasn't replaced by democracy. Rather, as some scholars say, it gave way over the 2010s to AKP patrimony. Instead of consensus politics and pluralism, they point out, the Erdogan years have often been highly divisive and autocratic in style. Around this time, Erdogan parted ways with liberals and started making moves toward establishing a presidential system, which would present fewer obstacles to his exercise of power. Just like the Ottoman sultans, powerful in their palaces but ruling at the mercy of local feudal lords, Erdogan saw the decentralized authority become open to usurpation. In the military, secular nationalist generals resigned in protest of the Gülenistic governor of the civil administration. Those who didn't quit were purged in massive court cases in 2008 and 10. Some received life sentences. In the judiciary, newly appointed prosecutors and judges who support the purges were promoted around 2010 and 2012. The press approved. One liberal paper, since bankrupted, compared the prosecutions to the Nuremberg trials. But nationalist Turks were angry, and the AKP lost their votes in Anatolia. To regain control, Erdogan broke with the Gülenists, cutting his support for educational institutions and purging its members from bureaucracy. In foreign policy, another field in which his cadres lack expertise, Erdogan handed the reins of the Ahmet Davutoğlu to a scholar of international relations, often described as the Turkish Henry Kissinger, and named him foreign minister in 2009. The AKP foreign ministers who preceded Davutoğlu had preserved Turkey's Western-focused foreign policy doctrine. As a member of NATO, a U.S. ally, and a candidate for the EU membership since 1999, Turkey has kept its distance from China, Iran, and Russia. Now, the soft-spoken professors proposed a different route. Turkey was the inheritor of the Ottoman Caliphate, and it needed to move from a wing state of the West to a pivot state, taking advantage of its location at the intersection of the Black Sea, the Caucasus, the Middle East, and Europe. Erdogan has savored these magnificent ambitions, and as the Arab Spring unfolded, Turkey set its sights on Syria, where it hoped for a regime change instigated by the Free Syrian Army, and on Egypt, where it placed all its chips on the Muslim Brotherhood. The Davutoğlu doctrine allowed Erdogan to reinvent himself as a global Islamic leader, someone who would prove the lot of Muslims not only in Turkey but elsewhere too. Believe me, Sarajevo won today as much as Istanbul, he said after winning a third term as Prime Minister in 2011. Beirut won as much as Izmir. Damascus won as much as Ankara. Ramallah, Nablus, Jenin, the West Bank, Jerusalem won as much as Diyarbakir. Two events have shattered those ambitions. The first was the unraveling of Erdogan's foreign policy in the Middle East. Afterwards, in Egypt, President Mohamed Morsi and the other leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood refused Erdogan's call to look to a secular Turkey as a model democracy. And after Morsi was toppled in a coup, Erdogan's hopes for a secular version of the Muslim Brotherhood across the region began to look fantastic. In Syria, the Kurds form a breakaway region in the country's north, leading Kurds in Turkey, who had been long seeking for a separate state, to pull out of the ongoing peace process with the central government. The second event was a domestic uprising. In 2013, millions of leftists and environmentalists marched in Istanbul's Gezi Park and in city squares across Turkey. It was then that Erdogan, having lost support from the Gülenists, the Kurds, and the liberals, turned to Turkish nationalists to remain in power. He now spoke admiringly of Atatürk and his policies, described his own critics as rabble-rousers, and claimed that Turkey was under siege by the West. Recently, in a television interview, he named his Islamist years in the Welfare Party as the mayor of Istanbul as an apprenticeship. His time as a reformist prime minister was his journey to statesmanship. But it is his years in the presidency that, in Erdogan's view, deserve the privileged title of mastership. Now, Erdogan, who is 65, rules with little separation of powers. That was inevitable, he believes, after the very public betrayal of former allies. In the presidential palace, plasma screens track which news stories are most widely read in the country, requiring specialists to rapidly address the snowballing problems that the country care about. But a few thousand officers are hardly enough for a nation of 82 million. For almost a century, elected ministers tackled the concerns of their constituents. Today, appointed members of boards specializing in education, culture, and technology have been made responsible for developing a policy. Our corporatist economy and a culture of favoritism in politics, the media, and the public sector are on the rise. Majoritarianism increasingly defines domestic politics. In the AKP's views, these tactics of control are necessary to keep a multi-ethnic and polarized country in order. But they, in fact, deepen the systematic failings of Turkish democracy, the weakness of institutions, the lack of press, and the ruthless pace of cultural shifts over the past century. Instead of solving these problems, the AKP has chosen to be victimized by them. Despite other challenges, Turkish civil society remains strong. Turkey has 52 million active social media users. In recent years, initiatives focusing on the security of ballot counting, fact-checking the media, LGBTQ rights, and violence against women have gained attention. As the famous Turkish novelist Orhan Pamuk notes, once a country gets too rich and complex, the leader may think himself to be too powerful. Erdogan's great challenge over the next decade, as individualism grows in Turkey and Islamophobic populism rises in Europe, will be to convince voters that his mixture of anger and patience is still a model to follow, that his formation story can continue to inspire, and that only his unaccessible ability can steer Turkey to safety. Erdogan will no doubt do everything in his power to succeed at this task.